Okay, I will get started with an introduction. Now, thank you everyone who's here joining us today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Amnesty Feminist's second webinar in our Voices of Afghanistan series. My name is Ophelia Chidgey, and I'm the co-chair of Amnesty Feminists. I'll be your host for this session. Thank you for joining on your lunch breaks. We had an amazing response to our first webinar, and we really appreciate you spending this time with us. This webinar series is part of our Rise with Afghan Women campaign. Currently, Afghan women face ongoing challenges, particularly since recent political shifts have continued to curtail many of their rights. But amid these hardships, the Afghan diaspora has been a source of hope and advocacy, which we will discuss in today's webinar. Our first webinar had focused more on the ongoing human rights issues facing women in Afghanistan, whereas today's focus is more on the role that women in the Afghan diaspora play in championing human rights and supporting Afghan women through their respective streams of work. We will showcase the resilience, creativity, and impactful work being done by our amazing speakers, Ariana Abawe and Sara Wahedi. Sara is a tech entrepreneur and humanitarian, the CEO of Civaam and the founder of Etisab, Afghanistan's first civic tech startup. She's a pioneer in the use of tech to report human rights violations and build solutions for crisis communities. Recognized globally for her work, Sara has been awarded Time Magazine's Next Generational Leader, MIT's Technology Review Innovators Under 35, and Forbes 30 Under 30. As well as we have Ariana, who is a London-based journalist, public speaker, and founder of Ariana Magazine. Ariana is passionate about sharing the beauty of Afghan culture, talent, and stories, and awarded the Young Entrepreneur of the Year 2022. Through her platform, she strives to support the people of Afghanistan and raise awareness on critical issues affecting the country. Before we jump in, just a reminder that the session will be an hour long, and I'll start off by asking some questions to our panel, and then we'll have some time for audience questions at the end. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the Q&A function. So to start off, some introductions. Ariana, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do, and also let us know why it is important, especially now, to raise awareness about the situation faced by women in Afghanistan?
Yeah, thank you so much, Philia and the team of Amnesty Feminist for organizing such a crucial webinars focused on Afghan women in particular. And thank you for everyone for joining this, and glad to see Sara here as well with us. Hi everyone. My name is Ariana Abawe. I'm the founder of Ariana Magazine, which is a multi-media platform. My platform focuses on showcasing the beautiful and often overlooked side of Afghanistan. The media coverage of Afghanistan is typically negative, but I aim to shift that narrative. Whenever I told people I'm from Afghanistan when growing up, they immediately had a fear or they were concerned about the situation there, and they were scared of, Afghans. In a sense, there was fear in their eyes. So Ariana Magazine highlights the rich culture of Afghanistan through its art, culture, poetry, and the people from various different fields, whilst also shedding light on the hardships and struggles of the people, such as poverty, human rights abuses, in particular for the women, the genocide of the Hazara community. I also try to showcase the challenges of ethnic groups like Hindus and Sikhs in Afghanistan as well. And I came from Kabul, Afghanistan, and my family moved to the UK in 2001. And I've lived in the UK for over 25 years, and I'm far away from Afghanistan, but I deeply have a connection to my country and a sense of responsibility. So I studied journalism at University of Brunel in London, and during my time there, I was the president of the Afghan Society, which I aim to showcase the beautiful side of Afghanistan through holding various cultural events, as well as raising money for the less fortunate in Afghanistan. And I hope to amplify as much voices as I'm able to through Ariana Magazine and my platform, and, showcase the true stories and authentic stories of our people instead of just relying on the mass media's representation of our country. And in regards to your question about why it's so important now, especially now, to raise awareness about the situation in Afghanistan, is because Afghanistan is the only country in the world that has prohibited access to education for girls and women above grade 6, and this is due to the Taliban. And some may argue that the war is over now, so why should we care now? But even yet there is no physical conflict. There's a silent war which is ongoing, a war on the psychological well-being of women and girls. And in particular, with each passing day, women face increasing restrictions, silencing them and eradicating their presence in Afghanistan. And without women in society, the potential of a country to flourish and thrive is very minimal. And the psychological and economical toll is devastating for women in Afghanistan, as well as the country as a whole, with forced child marriages, depression, and poverty. And it's the 21st century currently, where social media and news is more accessible than ever. So raising awareness about the human rights abuses faced by women in Afghanistan is crucial. And there's around 5 billion social media users in 2024, and information has been easier to share or access. So this widespread connectivity provides everyone with the opportunity and responsibility to use their platforms to inform and educate each other about the challenges women face, in particular in Afghanistan. So this is why it's more important, because restrictions are being implemented for women in Afghanistan day by day, even though it is slowly. Women are being eradicated, and the focus needs to be to the women of Afghanistan more than ever now.
Thank you, Ariana. Thank you for all of that context you gave as well. Thank you. And Sara, same question to you. Bit of an introduction, and especially now, why is it important to raise awareness?
Thank you so much, Ophelia, and thank you so much to Ariana for her amazing introductory comments. I completely agree on so many of her points. A little bit about myself. I've been working in the civic tech space for about 6 years now. It came from a personal experience. At the time, in 2018, I was working for the Office of the President as a policy aide in Afghanistan. And on my way home from work, I usually just walked because I didn't like to take private cars or anything like that. On my way home from work, I experienced an explosion. And while I'm watching this explosion in real time, literally a few meters away from me, a friend of mine at the US Embassy had messaged me and said, Sarah, I know that you live in this area of Kabul, and we just got this alert from the US Embassy that that there is some sort of explosion in this area of downtown Kabul. And I was watching the explosion in real time. I was looking at the chaos and the horror, and I was so astounded how my friend, who is about 10 kilometers away in this fortified green zone, had information like that. So after the explosion, I went and spoke with her, and she showed me that she has these alerts from the UN, and it's a company, a military contractor, or that's what I call them. They say that they're an NGO, but I don't agree with that. And they provide real-time alerts to diplomats, agencies, humanitarian organizations in crisis regions like Afghanistan. But the problem is that those reports are only available to those who can pay for them. And they're extremely expensive because the amount of whistleblowers that you need and informants on the ground to be able to have that kind of real-time information is very vast. And it was a light bulb moment for me. I was really shocked as to how a tool like this was even legal and not something that had to be democratized for people in crisis regions. And went about working on this problem of how do you ensure that people across the world in crisis regions have these type of tools, and they're not just separated based off of your capacity to pay for them. And since then, we built the Ehtisab app, which most people know about, and launched that in 2018. Or sorry, building in 2018, launched in 2020, and it was active up until a few months ago. Unfortunately, we did have to make the decision to shut it down for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm sure we'll get into that later about the safety and securitization problems and access to information in Afghanistan under the Talib regime. But what I've been able to do through that is now build another startup, which essentially builds ideas like Ehtisab across Afghanistan, not just for security and information seeking, but healthcare, education access, and also accountability measures. Right now, we're working on a project for the ICC. So that's really been my mission, and I've been working on that for yeah, almost a decade now. And on the side, Civaam also, our startup firm, provides consulting and design and prototyping support for those who want to build human-centered technology in crisis regions. And that's really our thing. And also focusing on technologists who come from these areas. And I've said this kind of joke many times, but I don't think a young 21-year-old from New York City should be tasked with the job of designing something that's going to be used by Afghans. It should really come from local technologists, and they should be taking the responsibility of building technology that really impacts a lot of people. Like Ariana had mentioned, the internet penetration in Afghanistan is huge, and the reason for that is once the Taliban came into power, a lot of people realized that, and I think they knew that the information gap was going to increase, and we had completed a Kabul citywide survey on people's relationships with their smartphones. And I think it was about 87% had said that if they didn't own a phone, or someone within their family hadn't owned a phone, that they were going to buy that. And that listed first over even gold. So it just goes to show the tool of the smartphone and how impactful it is and how many people have relied on it because of the bans. For example, University of the People provides the most scholarships for Afghan women, and that's completely based online. They provide a full diploma that's recognized internationally, but you're not able to access that diploma or that education program unless you're online. So the need for women and girls to be online is unprecedented. And shifting to your question as to why it's important to speak now, Ariana touched on a lot of the important points, but I'd say that the news that came out yesterday and the day before about the vocational training bans on nursing and medical training is incredibly shocking. I really don't have the words to exemplify the shock. And I guess the one of the ways that I can do that is I was speaking to a friend in Afghanistan today who had her wisdom teeth pulled out yesterday. And the ban is already impacting people because they're scared to go to work. And she told me that there was a man who had really no experience in extraction, in tooth extraction, but because the women were so afraid to go to the clinic, suddenly this man who had no experience was now tasked with pulling her tooth out. And she said it was one of the most excruciating experiences of her life. And, she was begging for help. And eventually some of the women who had just kind of been staying in the corner came in and supported because they were actually tasked and they had the experience for tooth extraction. Excuse me. So we're seeing the impact already that one, women are scared as to how this is going to be implemented, but it's having real life impact. I mean, because the Taliban has said no women, you're now getting men who have no experience in a lot of these roles now being pushed to go into medical care, which is terrifying. So the reason why it's important to speak now is that this is only going to get worse, and I have mentioned this over the last 3 years, and I'm not sure what needs to happen for people to take it seriously. The Taliban wants to return to 1996. There is no revision in their regime. And, it really bothers them how women continue to defy. Because remember, in 1996, the Taliban, within a few months, was able to effectively force women to wear the blue burqa. So we weren't seeing women like we're seeing today who are still wearing the hijab without a mask or with a mask or different variations of it. And the Taliban is really, I think, shocked as to how women are continuing to defy. And that's something that they kind of that they want to stifle. And if the world doesn't speak out, they're going to become even more emboldened to do so. And I think that this is the time for us to act. And a lot of really important news is coming out from the ICC, with Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, noting that arrest warrants will be released soon for members of the senior Taliban officials, which is going to really impact the regime. So we know that the involvement of the international community works, but everyone who's watching the webinar now, or who are involved, needs to ensure that they're continuing to speak out and to read the news and to, as Ariana said, to listen to local Afghan voices. Because like I said, the story of my friend today at the dentist office is not something that the international media is going to be able to easily access. It's because we're able to read in Dari and Pashto and in our local languages and share that information. So elevate Afghan voices as best you can if you see them on Blue Sky or Twitter, and that's one of the best ways forward.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your stories and your experiences with us today. You both had very inspiring personal journeys. So firstly, Sara, through your innovative contributions in technology, and Ariana, through your work in media, you've both made profound impact. Just to start with you, Sara, about your work in civic technology and your focus on democratizing information in risk communities. How do you believe that technology can be used as a tool to support Afghan women in risk zones? And you've touched a bit on that already, so thank you. And can you give some examples of how your app or other similar technologies that you've mentioned support women in Afghanistan directly?
That's a great question. Thank you, Ophelia. So technology right now is, I think, one of the only vehicles left for us in terms of maneuvering this new Afghanistan. We have a significant portion of the population that are online, but that variation exists in phones as well. So we're looking at the majority of mobile users who are using the kind of basic hardware, which is between 90 to 200 US dollars in the phones, and those are Huawei, OnePlus, Samsung A series, very popular phones that provide really the basic apps, Android specifically, which are WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, text messaging, Telegram, YouTube, a couple of things. And it's getting cheaper to use the phone. So there's a very small, window frame of the usage of technology. I always expect the worst with the Taliban at this point. We've seen regimes able to thwart smartphone usage. I'm personally not confident as to how established the Taliban is in terms of monitoring and blocking apps. And I think this really depends on waves. And the reason why, for example, Ehtisab, we purposely kept it with as little downloads as possible is because I knew that if the app goes viral, they will shut it down. And I knew that because one of the most popular news agencies in Afghanistan called Afghanistan International, which is based in London, they had a phone number on WhatsApp, and they'd say, if you have any photos or videos, send this to Afghanistan International and we'll report it on the news. What happened was essentially people just took this number and just ran with it. And you had people sending in reports and videos of Talibs beating women, harassing them, just really horrific scenes that people were recording with their phones. And what the Taliban did eventually, when it really just spiked in popularity, was they said that anyone who was caught texting Afghanistan International would be arrested. So for me, with a very small team, all based in Afghanistan and a lot of women as well, it was dangerous for us to allow the app to expand. And that's one of the reasons why it did not have much penetration post 2021. And we really focused on limiting that and just really focusing on collecting reports. But in terms of technology, informal network pathways to healthcare to education are going to be critical. Something that we're working on at Civaam, which I can't really get into due to the security aspects of it, but we are focusing on how do we tap into the nurses and doctors currently across Afghanistan, and how do you connect them in a way that can't be targeted or tracked by the Taliban. And it is a very complicated question. I'm sure many in the audience who have a tech background or who work in security might have an idea as to how that works. There have been really successful cases, for example, in Myanmar, of information as aid that's been led by the International Rescue Committee. So informal network pathways using technology, using web platforms to connect people to doctors, to nurses, to schools is going to be critical. It's something that we're already using now. A lot of women's NGOs have those informal networks, whether they're using WhatsApp groups or Telegram or have built their own web platform, basically trying to circumvent Talib surveillance. So that's, I think, going to be one of the most critical uses for technology and also for accountability measures. Another thing is that Afghanistan had about 400 to 500 women judges that were working up until 2021. Now, formal accountability measures have been dismantled. So, a woman who wanted to make a criminal or legal complaint now has to go through the tribal framework, which UN Women released just a damning report that they do not work, and they actually put women in more danger. So now women aren't reporting really anything. And another thing we're working on with the ICC is how do you center Afghan women's voices, and how do we build platforms where they're able to send in reports, center them, and direct them to the ICJ for a couple of really important hearings that are coming up. So those are a couple of ways that we've been using technology to circumvent Talib surveillance and support women and girls in accessing emergency services.
Yeah, thank you. And just to touch on and carry on from what you were saying about centering the voices of Afghan women, just quickly for this question, because I'm conscious of time, but we've seen that Afghan women's voices have often been sidelined in international discussions and critical negotiations. Afghan women have long been calling for their voices to be centered in an equitable manner. And in your perspective, what does that mean in practice? And what are the steps needed to achieve this so we can hear more of the voices of Afghan women?
I'll be very brief. So there's a really important paper by a fantastic ICC prosecutor named Payam Akavan, who is an Iranian Canadian, and he wrote this paper from speaking with survivors in the Rohingya in Myanmar, and asked and said, I'm from the ICC. It's a world court, and we're here to collect your stories. And the title of that paper is called "What Kind of Court Is This?" Because a lot of people had no idea what that even meant. The ICC, I mean, it's obvious. Many in Afghanistan, my own family, for example, when I speak about these projects, don't even know, like, what does it even mean, a world court? So we see already a huge discrepancy in terms of the West and global majority countries, where the notion of a global court doesn't make any sense, because they are essentially prosecutors and people who are from the West who've decided, based off of international human rights and human rights precedents, that they're going to take these cases further. But the important thing here is that we need to ensure that when we are asking for women to speak up, that we are communicating what the ICC and the ICJ actually does. And to just focus on international law and jurisprudence, and just to say that this is illegal in the eyes of the West, is not going to be sustainable. It really needs to tap into Afghan women and girls, and to share that information. And what we've been doing at Civaam is working on a subliminal messaging campaign to say there is a world court, and their main role is to connect your voices specifically to those who are hoping to hold the Taliban accountable. And what we've been doing is to really break down, like, what is the ICC? What is the ICJ? Why is your testimony important? And why does the absence of your testimony impact, international law and jurisprudence? And something that I was speaking about at The Hague this week is we really need to shift from trying to hold regimes accountable without actually having those present who really are impacted by these bans and these human rights violations. So we have been focusing on that and hope to release a pilot very soon. So if anyone is interested in that, please do reach out, because we do need all the support we can get on launching this web platform. But yeah, in terms of centering, it's trying to tap into the local population, not focusing so much on Western journalists, trying to find Afghans within the country who can speak. And many of us, like Ariana and myself and so many others, have so many women and girls who are waiting to speak out in the international media, and trying to figure out innovative ways of getting them in front of the camera, but to keep them safe. And sometimes I understand that the international media wants to see faces and wants to see the names, but that's just not possible. So we need to think innovatively of how do we center these voices in the media, especially in international news organizations, but also just giving space to these women, and not trying to focus on the Taliban just in terms of human rights violations, like in a textbook case, but really the women in the faces who are being impacted by this. That's how I would say is like a high level way that we can approach this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. And that takes us really nicely to Ariana and to your experience and to your work. So just moving in, as mentioned, your work on Ariana Magazine and beyond, and you focus on showcasing Afghan beauty, resilience, and cultural richness alongside raising awareness of the ongoing abuses in the country, but often countering the negative portrayal of Afghanistan in the media. So, Ariana, to you, why is it so important to broadcast the rich diversity of Afghanistan, given that the majority of coverage has unfortunately been negative? And what aspects of Afghanistan do you feel are most misunderstood and overlooked?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ophelia and Sarah, for sharing your thoughts on the questions. It's really insightful to hear all of these conversations. Regarding why it's important to broadcast the rich diversity of Afghanistan's culture or heritage, because broadcasting a country's culture, especially with Afghanistan, which has been often negatively portrayed in the media in a lens of war, conflict, and oppression. Growing up, like I mentioned, Afghanistan and Islam, for example, were often misrepresented, depicted as negative, oppressive, and barbaric. While Afghanistan has faced significant challenges, this one-sided narrative overlooks the immense beauty, resilience, and the richness of the country's people, arts, and culture. Afghanistan is far more than its struggles. It is a multilingual, multi-ethnic country, which is the heart of Asia. The contributions of so many aspects of Afghan people, from the poets such as Jalaluddin Rumi, Rabia Balkhi, have shaped literature and continue to inspire the world. Poetry, for example, has been used as a form of entertainment, communication for Afghanistan, for Afghan people, reflecting the country's deep cultural roots. Afghanistan is also home to the first oil paintings discovered in the Bamyan caves, showing how its people have contributed to global art and culture for centuries. Afghanistan's location along the ancient Silk Road made it a hub for trade, culture, and knowledge exchange. Despite decades of conflict and hardship, the Afghan people remained resilient. Their stories of survival and hope are an integral part of Afghanistan's identity. Each country's culture is a blueprint, something to be preserved, celebrated, and shared, because each country has its own unique culture, which is a representation of its own country, which makes it unique. Unfortunately, much of Afghanistan's beauty has been overshadowed by stereotypes in the mass media, which often seeks to portray the other as lesser. But the truth is, we can build bridges, challenging biases and breaking stereotypes. And especially now, with the Taliban takeover, we can see that culture and arts have been at stake, with music being banned, or, some cultural sites being abolished or wiped out, and books, for example, being stopped, being printed, for example. So culture and arts is a really vital aspect of each country and must be preserved and continued, because that's the beauty of each country, and we must keep that alive, because without that, that's basically a part of a country gone, and that's the aspect which each country needs to preserve and keep hold of, and that is at stake at the moment with the Taliban in power.
Thank you. And thank you for those examples as well. And hopefully people can go away and have a deeper look at those things that have been mentioned. I'm just conscious of time, but quickly, you were talking about the culture and art of Afghanistan and sharing stories. So how do you think that these can shape the international understanding and support for Afghan women's rights?
Yeah, definitely. Sharing the culture and art of Afghanistan alongside stories of Afghan people directly, instead of just relying on generic stories of Afghan people in the mass media, is a powerful way to shape international understanding and gain support of Afghan women's rights. Throughout history and art, art and culture has served as impactful tools of communication capable of bridging gaps and challenging injustices. For example, Banksy's street art, for example, if you remember the throwing of the flower, that's really a significant symbol of condemning war. There is also another image, We Can Do It poster by Millers, which was iconic. It became a symbol of empowerment of women during World War II. And similarly, showcasing Afghanistan's cultural richness can play a significant role in advocating for justice and equality if it's done correctly with the right messages in place. Art and culture allows us to humanize the struggles of Afghan women by connecting their stories to universal themes of resilience, creativity, and hope. For example, through my platform, Ariana Magazine, I've worked to showcase Afghanistan's beauty and ongoing issues in the country. These includes highlighting Afghan artists in the country as well as abroad through the diaspora, for example, food recipes, the achievements of Afghans through various different fields, actors, fashion designers, athletes, doctors, refugees, with their refugee story. And by doing so, I emphasize that Afghan people are not defined solely by conflict. They are innovators, they are dreamers, they are contributors of the global community. And at the same time, I use this platform to shed light on the pressing issues in the country, for example. And this mission just extends digital content. I've organized and collaborated with various organizations in London, for example, to amplify Afghan voices, and we're never able to talk about the ongoing issues in the country. And so these initiatives shine light on the resilience and creativity and determination of Afghan women while raising awareness about the ongoing human rights in Afghanistan. And culture, art, and media sharing stories, like I mentioned, of people directly in Afghanistan, as well as the diaspora, can shape international understanding and support for Afghan women's rights. Because when you hear stories of people directly affected, it really helps you at least visualize in a sense, or not be directly in their shoes, but at least empathize that the struggles they are facing are really impacting them and the country itself.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for giving us so much to think about. And those positive aspects. And it's really great to hear, as you were saying, something that is of a different lens towards Afghanistan and its culture. So to both of you, so you're both very successful in your respective streams of work and advocating for supporting Afghan women. My question to both of you is, how has your experience as an Afghan woman of the diaspora influenced the direction and impact of your work? Ariana, I don't know if you want to start off.
I don't mind whoever. Sarah, if you would like to start, or me, I don't mind. Yeah, okay. So my journey as an Afghan woman, a woman of the diaspora, living in the UK for most of my life, has deeply shaped my experiences, especially with the sacrifices my parents made, amongst many other Afghans or other refugees when they moved to the UK for a better life and a future for us. Originally from Kabul, Afghanistan, my father was a radio journalist and my mother worked at a school. They both left their careers and home country behind, which is so heartbreaking, seeking a safer environment where their children, me, can receive an education free from limitations or fear. And growing up in the UK, I became aware of the privileges and opportunities available to me, especially as a girl. My access to education was something that many girls and women in Afghanistan still don't have. And I didn't take this for granted. Studying journalism at university was a significant achievement, one that my parents could only have dreamed of in Afghanistan, where women's access to education and careers, especially in journalism, for example, seeing Afghan women in the face of media was severely restricted and is restricted at the moment. So as a female journalist and founder of Ariana Magazine, I became increasingly aware of how women in Afghanistan have been targeted for speaking out, being the voice for women's rights and fighting for change in the country. And this awareness has driven me and given me the courage and motivation to give a voice to the voiceless, to amplify and showcase the beautiful side of Afghanistan, as well as highlighting the struggles ongoing in the country. And I've always been inspired by the bravery and work of Afghan women such as Sarah, amongst other amazing Afghan women who continue to fight for their education and equality despite the immense dangers they face. The strength motivates me every day to use my platform to share the stories and advocate for a brighter future for them. My work is not just shining light on Afghanistan's cultural richness, but also challenging the negative stereotypes in the country. So this experience of an Afghan woman in the diaspora has really influenced me and shaped me, because being so far from my homeland, thousands of miles away, I just visited twice when I was very young, around 11 years old, and not being back has really motivated me to keep this mission ongoing and, keep the culture alive, keep Afghan stories alive, because we are responsible. Some may say we're away from Afghanistan, we don't have responsibility, but you have more responsibility than those who are in the country. So this is some ways which being a woman of the diaspora has influenced my direction and my work.
Thank you, Ariana. And that was a call to action there as well. Thank you. Sarah, over to you. Same question.
Thank you so much, Ophelia. I resonate with Ariana a lot. I think being an diaspora Afghan woman is like any person who comes from a diaspora community is so frustrating in so many ways. And I think one of the most recent examples is I was having a conversation with a very senior official who was in charge of the Doha talks, the disastrous Doha talks that essentially handed Afghanistan to the Taliban. And I held him very accountable in some very stern talks. And he came to me afterward, excuse me, and he said, "Where are you from? Because your accent, it's not from Afghanistan." I thought that was really interesting because what he was expecting was that even though he's not Afghan, that Afghan women should all be, they should have some sort of accent or they should wear some sort of clothing. And I get this a lot. I get this a lot from people who probably follow me on social media and hear my accent and they think, well, that's not what I was expecting. And the thing that I have to continue to remind people is that what the diaspora means is that at some point my family fled like Ariana's and we fled in 2005. And but that doesn't take away from the fact that we also experienced this. So my family experienced the first Talib regime. So maneuvering the space as an Afghan, obviously, one, ensuring that, and I do this every time, whenever there's a panel or anything, and like I shared my friend's story today about her experience at the dentist, is I do not attend a panel unless I'm able to actually bring a story from Afghanistan within the last 24 to 48 hours. And the reason for that is I'm very humbled and privileged to be here with all of you. But I know that many Afghan women and girls don't. So a part of my job is to ensure that those stories get out to as many people as possible, but also to be kinder to myself in holding this space because I have felt a lot of guilt and said, and I have stepped away a lot from public facing roles because of this kind of internal conflict of the fact that I'm not there and I don't have the wherewithal and the agency to speak, but it was a lot of Afghan women and girls who reached out to me and said, "You're not speaking anymore. What's going on? And there's no one else, and you need to speak." And so they've really emboldened me to do that. But it's really difficult because you are neither here nor there. So I know I don't really feel very much Canadian, and I don't very much feel very Afghan. I feel very much in flux, and the way that I maneuver that is that I'm privileged to have had the education that I have, the experience that I've had. I've had amazing experiences. I worked at Apple for 2 years and learned so much from them. And being able to have, these experiences have allowed me to be able to pay back to my country in the ways that I can. And for me, it's technology. But it is very incredibly difficult. But I think the way that we maneuver is that we know that we came from somewhere, and it's indicative through how I look and how how Ariana looks, for example. We did come from somewhere, and I think that provides solace in the fact that we can give back in our own way, and that perhaps might not be the way that people like or the way that they expect us to react, but we all do our work in our own ways. And I think it's incredibly important for anyone in the diaspora who's really struggling with that perhaps they don't speak the language anymore or they don't have family there. It doesn't matter. You're not defined by anyone else's parameters, and just do whatever you think falls within your own work, and that can be anything. It can be art, history, technology, politics, whatever it may be. But there's no answer to this. It's really just a lot of trial and error.
Thank you. Another call to action there, which is great. And thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience. And as you said about bringing a story in from really recent, the last week, which is really great and provides so much great context. So thank you. And we have some really great questions from the audience now. So I'm going to just open up into the Q&A. So firstly, and actually kind of following on from the conversation we just had, question I think is appropriate for both of you. So question we have here is, what can young Afghan women outside of Afghanistan do to stand up for women's rights in Afghanistan? And how can us as individuals and the international community stand up for and amplify the voices of Afghan women who are being silenced under the Taliban? So I don't know, Sarah, if you want to go first, as we were just talking about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get straight to the point because I see a lot of people saying, what can we do? One is within your own communities, there's perhaps Afghan refugees or Afghan immigrants. And also post-Exodus 2021, a lot of Afghan refugees have settled in perhaps your own communities. Reach out to them, hold town halls, get them to speak about their experiences. And second is, as I mentioned, Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, has said that they are going to release or announce arrest warrants. And that I truly believe the only reason why that happened is because of so many people in the last 4 to 5 months who have been speaking so much about Afghanistan on social media and the news. And I would say, whenever you see a post about Afghanistan, share it, elevate it, share it with your colleagues, share it with your friends, post it in your work chats, get the word out as best you can. And also to your local, your representatives, for example, ask them, send them an email. I heard that the ICC is perhaps going to be holding the Taliban accountable. What are we doing and what is our government doing? And, hold your governments accountable for the aid that's going to Afghanistan. Who is it going through? And I would say that it's really important right now, for example, to fund UNHCR. They've had their funding cut and probably will have their funding cut under the Trump administration. UNICEF, a lot of the UN agencies that are able to do the work without the Taliban circumventing their work are going to be in disaster situations. So do donate to those UN agencies. I can assure you, I know that a lot of people have questions about them and have the reservations, but really they do the most important work. They work with local grassroots organizations to provide healthcare and to provide education. And the more support they get, the more leverage they have. So those are three, is really support international agencies because they do have the frameworks. I know some people like grassroots, they only work to a certain extent. They don't really have, unfortunately, the same breadth that the larger agencies do. And I've grappled with this for many, many years, but I'd say in the current context, the larger agencies do work in this context. Reach out to your local representatives and social media, get those local Afghans out, get them to speak in your communities, and elevate their stories. And like I said, that they can supplement that. So if you find someone, they'll probably have someone within their local communities who can also support. So definitely do that. And really, listen to local Afghan voices, Afghan diaspora, Afghans within the country, try to find those voices, because you have to remember that a lot of news organizations will only go to Afghanistan. Well, they won't go to Afghanistan, they're not allowed to, but they'll only cover Afghanistan if they think that it's something that is going to be flashy or, shocking enough, but they're not going to really get into those local stories that you need to hear to keep the momentum going. So find those Afghan voices and really elevate them as best you can.
Those really tangible examples as well. And Ariana, same question to you.
Definitely, just echoing what Sarah has said, she's pinpointed some key aspects where young Afghan people or Afghan women outside of Afghanistan can do, or, not just Afghan women, but those who are non-Afghans can stand up for women's rights in Afghanistan. There are various aspects, no matter how little it may seem, it can create an impact. Raising awareness using their social media platforms, sharing content about Afghanistan, or reposting a story, for example, about the ongoing issues in Afghanistan, such as what has been implemented recently for the nursing and midwifery training by the Taliban. So raising awareness about the ongoing restrictions that have been implemented, fundraising or supporting charities who are helping on the ground, supporting through education. So there are underground schools, for example, or some online schools which are taking place in secret, for example. So you can find those charities which are helping on the ground to support Afghan women. So you can donate or, raise awareness about those that are helping on the ground. For example, there's also participating in protests and rallies. initially when the Taliban did take over, there was lots of protests taking place. So if there is protest organized or taking place, we should take part or, raise awareness about this so we can have our government held accountable, using our voice, for example, to speak out in our community. As Afghan women, for example, you can use your voice or share your story or share what's happening in Afghanistan, with your friends, your local community, or hosting educational events or participating in webinars like this like today, educating the community about the situation of Afghan women under the Taliban. So organizing events as well could be really insightful, because there are people, you may think lots of people do know about the situation, which they should, because it's nearly been 3 years since the Taliban's takeover. So lots of people should know about the ongoing issues in the country, but many don't know. So just informing people about the situation in Afghanistan and talking about it, speaking up about it. And there are petitions and letters, for example, whereby you can urge your government or, MPs to take action about what's going in the country. So there is some things you can do to help, even though you're not directly in Afghanistan and living abroad. You can do so many things, no matter how little it may seem to you, it can offer a bigger impact.
Thank you, Ariana. Yes, and we have some more information about links for petitions in the UK that we will share at the end. So thank you. Just, I guess, sort of a quick fire question to both of you. In your opinion and through your experiences, is it safe to speak up as an Afghan woman outside of Afghanistan? I don't know if Ariana, you want to start, and then Sarah.
Yeah, sure, I could start. When I studied journalism, I actually had a fear of becoming a journalist, because that involves speaking out and, giving a voice to the voiceless and talking about taboo topics. And in that sense, I was scared about what would happen if I speak out. And especially with women in Afghanistan who are journalists, and they have feared their life and, suffered, whether that is through deaths or, suicide bombings and so forth, because they are speaking out and they are journalists. And there is a fear, in a sense, living outside of the country, far away from Afghanistan, that, there could be death threats, there could be, targeting us speaking out. So there are risks involved. However, those risks for women in the country are far wider compared to us, especially living abroad. We have, the opportunity to speak out in countries like the UK. We have the freedom of expression, which we shouldn't take for granted, because those in Afghanistan don't have that opportunity. So there is fear, in a sense, and a risk of, speaking out loud.
Thank you, Ariana, and Sarah, same question.
Yeah, it's actually incredibly dangerous. I stepped away from social media for maybe a couple of months, because the harassment was just getting out of control. Um, Sometimes I kind of go in waves. I know that I've really been blessed with and humbled with the capacity to speak. And I don't think there's anything really different with me compared to any other Afghan woman. I think I've just gotten really good at kind of contextualizing things and just getting to the point. But it is dangerous. I have one of my best friends, her family was her father was arrested and detained by the Taliban. And just to see her and how to maneuver that to get her family out, it was just so heartbreaking. And like even for myself, I get threats all the time. I've had some people stalk me. I've had, people try to defame me, email my universities. I've had someone email Oxford, really just horrific things. And it gets tiresome because we don't have the protections in place for women, like myself and Ariana, to be able to do the work. And, social media, especially X, has really just, put forces out of control in terms of the harassment. So there are days when you just can't do it, but then there are days when you have amazing women and individuals who reach out and say, this story was really important for me for fundraising or aid or something, and then you realize that it does actually have an impact. And just even the couple of days that we've been sharing about this ban, we've had some people reach out from medical schools and institutions saying, how can we help? So we know that speaking out is important, but it does have huge implications for us personally. But I did want to include a little thing, a plug. I have a friend who is leading Shrek underground schools, and she is currently providing underground education using mobile technology, but also in-person classes. And if there is an email that we're going to be sending out to the newsletters, I will include that. Her name is Parso Hakim, so please do support her on X and Blue Sky as well. But yeah, so it's difficult. We're maneuvering, but it can get pretty exhausting. I think most women face this regardless of working in Afghanistan or the space. I think unfortunately women just are targeted more than anyone else. And I wish that there were more protections in place, but unfortunately, it's more just building a community of women and support around you to be able to do this work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those challenging experiences that you've had. I think we've got time for just one last question each. There are some specific questions actually, so just for each of you. To Ariana specifically, a question here about somebody teaching literature in Shanghai recently taught ESL students about Malala and her story fighting for women's educational rights. How can I get high school age students involved in raising more awareness about the recent events in Afghanistan? Question to you, Ariana.
So how to get high school students in Shanghai to get involved in?
Yeah, but more broadly, I guess, high school age students involved in raising more awareness about recent events in Afghanistan.
Well, as we know currently in Afghanistan, there's a ban for secondary education and higher education. In particular, if we talk about secondary education above grade 6. So for those in high school, they could, relate in a sense that, people my age are unable to get education. And so what could they do in their shoes? They could raise awareness in whatever possibility or radar they can raise awareness, whether that is talking to their parents maybe about the ongoing situations in Afghanistan. Look, like there are people my age that are banned from getting education in Afghanistan. What could we do? So talking with their parents perhaps could also help. Talking with their university, not university, their school or institution, institution, their teachers, the ongoing situation in Afghanistan, what's going on. So raising awareness, talking about it, I don't know what else high school students would be able to access in terms of social media. If they have social media accounts, they could raise awareness. If they have a profile, depending on their age, they could share about the ongoing situation in Afghanistan and the issues women and girls face. They could yes, just speak about it. That's really a powerful way they could get involved. And, you as a teacher, for example, could educate your students as well about the situation in Afghanistan, providing, educational resources, sharing stories, slideshows, for example, just giving talks or holding like webinars like the cell, what we're having now, inviting someone and talking about the situation in Afghanistan from someone from Afghanistan or, from the diaspora to shed light about the human rights abuses towards women. So there are some things that could be done in terms of being a teacher or a student. So yeah, that's some things I could advise on.
Thank you. And we did have more questions in the Q&A and more specific questions for each of you, but we are running short on time. But thank you everyone for all of your Q&A questions. I wanted to just lastly ask you both, if there was one thing that you want the audience to take away from this conversation, what would it be? I don't know, Sarah, if you want to start.
Sure. Thank you so much again, Ophelia, for having us. And I just finish off by saying I saw a comment by someone, from someone, I think they're from Afghanistan, who also talked about university. So another really, really important thing that everyone here can do is if there's a local college, community college, university in your area, email them and say, do you have a quota for Afghan women and girls? And like I said, it doesn't always have to be in person. I mean, it would be great, excuse me, if visas could be given. And I've had the privilege of working with a couple of member states, countries to change their asylum processes and essentially not requiring proof for asylum and just asylum based on gender. And we're really thrilled to see that in Switzerland and a couple of European countries recently in the last few months. but essentially to get women to study. And I know that it's not everyone and everyone isn't available, but we can see that now even the gap of a few hundred doctors or however many that they're going to be is going to have a direct impact, a really severe impact on the Afghan people. So getting a few hundred amazing women and men to study healthcare, obviously putting the pressure on women. But if this is going to be a long-term ban, we're going to need men, unfortunately, to be able to provide services for women. And this is a very complicated question that I have yet to really grapple with is if only men can provide, healthcare services, and, we really aren't seeing the Taliban push back. I mean, what are we able to do to be able to at least provide urgent services? So these conversations need to happen. And also, yeah, to get your schools out and send them emails, ask them if they have quotas for Afghan students, women and girls, because that's something that can also happen. My alma mater, Columbia, has a specific scholarship for Afghan women. I know that there's a lot of other schools in the United States who also have that. At Oxford, we do have a couple of fellowships as well. So really hold your local universities accountable and say, hey, have you provide any scholarship for Afghan women? That would be incredible as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And really quickly, Ariana, same question to you. We've got a couple of minutes left.
The question about what we can take away from this webinar.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, if there was one thing that you want the audience to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
One thing would be quite difficult, but a few things really quickly would be please remember Afghan women in Afghanistan continue to amplify their voices, share their stories on social media, or learn from Afghan women about their stories, and stay informed and educated about the ongoing, human rights abuses in Afghanistan. They are our sisters and fellow human beings at the end of the day, and that's what truly matters. As well as that, we need to, donate to charitable causes, and amplify and hold our government to account and to do whatever we can in our capacity. So please don't forget Afghan women and girls in Afghanistan, because they are our sisters and they are waiting for us to, hear their voices and to share their voices. And please don't forget them.
Thank you. And thank you both. Thank you both so very much for joining us today and sharing your incredible insights. Your work really reminds us of the profound impact that individuals can have in shaping the future for Afghan women in Afghanistan, and also all of the great takeaways and advice that you've given everyone in the audience today hopefully will be really great. Also, thank you to our audience for joining us for this important conversation. Your engagement and support has been vital in amplifying these stories, and your participation in the Q&A has been really excellent as well. Thank you. Just a couple of points before we wrap up, just to leave you with a couple of other ways to get involved. As Ariana mentioned earlier, about signing petitions, we've got some links going into the chat there. So please do sign and share the petition. I'm calling for the UK government to stand up for Afghan women and hold the Taliban to account. That will be in the chat there for you, as well as a couple of other points. So this Saturday, the 7th of December, we're hosting a space at Amplify, which is Amnesty International UK's Human Rights Festival. During this festival, there will be a live recording of the Guilty Feminist podcast where you can hear more discussions about the situation in Afghanistan from more expert guests. And lastly, we have just launched our first annual report for women's human rights globally. The link will be popped in the chat for you there. Be sure to check that out. And that dives deeper into the challenges and successes of human rights of women globally. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you both Ariana and Sarah again for joining us. Your insight has been really excellent. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.